Good evening. I'm Greer McGeary. My guest tonight is Dianne Martin. Welcome, Dianne.
Thank you.
One of the usual things I do ask my guest is, when was the first time you had an inkling that you weren't quite what you were being brought up as?
I can remember early in primary school probably feeling more aligned with the girls rather than the boys. Just one vivid memory sticks out is sitting in a grassed field making daisy chains with the girls and just feeling this is normal, but beyond that, regional Victoria, you sort of tend to be socialised as who you were meant to be rather than who you were.
Was there any inkling from like the family or those around you that you felt that way?
No, I kept it very well hidden. I mean, I'd be sneaking mum's clothes or underwear and my sister's swimwear at times. And unbeknownst to them, but at one point early on, I was discovered, but that sort of made me feel very embarrassed and ashamed and so forth. But I can't recall any negativity coming from it or even any discussion about it.
Just one of those things that you sort of suspect, I'm not supposed to be doing this sort of thing.
Well, I mean, coming from mum, nothing was said, nothing from my sister. She can't even remember it. But, it's sort of etched in my mind as something that drove me right underground.
Because I have a similar sort of memory. When I was a toddler, maybe closer to 3, but I got into mum's trousseau box and put on the nightie, and that mum found me and sort of picked me up like all mums would. And Dad, being the type of work he did, he worked in a room at the back of the house, and mum just took me around. They had a lovely laugh and that, but I was at that stage the third of 3 brothers, and I really had that sense of, little boys aren't supposed to be doing this. It really set the pattern for a long time. I grew up and I love my athletics, so I love my running and all that sort of stuff. What were you like as a youngster?
Oh, into all the sports, Not that I felt I needed to be, well, maybe I needed to hide in some respects or just adopt the mantle of what I should be. Nothing consciously though, but I was in all the sports, football, tennis, anything on offer.
I was much the same, particularly as a teenager. I really got into athletics and loved my running. Did both summer track and field and cross country in the winter. Did a little bit of swimming, but I always had this thought, I'd like to wear those things, but mum was the only woman in the house, and mum was 5'3" and we're all these 6 foot sort of things. Not quite the same.
We just mentioned swimming then. I can remember as part of our swimming education at school, to get your whatever level certificate it was, we went across the road to the school that they had an indoor pool. I remember lining up waiting to go into the pool area because they had a foot bath and feeling very subconscious or self-conscious because I was slightly overweight, and as such I did have sort of a minor chest as a fat boy, but I felt very self-conscious about it, thinking, I'd sit there with my arm or stand there with my arms crossed, just feeling as though, I don't know if I'm comfortable.
Well, I was very much the super fit teenager, full adult height at 16, and so I was extremely fit. And but I used to help out at a swimming pool, and when you get out of the pool and you wrap the towel around, but I carefully fold mine in half, so it was a mini skirt. There's the only way I could sort of, in a sense, publicly demonstrate something slightly different. Do you have any sort of sense of doing things like that?
Not publicly. I was more just dressing in private, and it's more my thought where I was going. I was always dreaming of, very much into science fiction and so forth. So, any sort of storyline about transformation or, body swap or mind swap or anything like that would always play on my mind about trying to sort of attain the female presentation or experience.
So with all those thoughts and that, so going through, particularly when you're in secondary school and those teenage years, was there any sense of anyone sort of bullying you because you had that sort of...
No, I think because I was relatively big and, played some of the more physical sports like rugby and rowing and so forth, I wasn't necessarily an easy target. And also the way I probably looked, no one would have thought that,
This is in your life.
Yes.
Did you feel as though with those thoughts did it impact on the way you thought about the subjects you took at school and the path that you might have followed academically?
No, not directly. I've always probably, maybe because of these inner feelings, I was always very reserved and somewhat sheltered, and hence I do a lot or get involved in a lot of, I suppose, solo activities at home, tinkering and, DIY stuff. So that maybe just played on the fact that I like to tinker and so forth. So that pushed me more into the mechanical, the engineering type of disciplines.
More or less finish school and you're getting into developing the skills for your suit. So did you go to uni?
Yes. Got down to Monash University and, young 18-year-old sort of walking on campus, halls of residence down there, and very, very, I suppose, naive to the world. Never really had a girlfriend up at that stage, probably, again, feeling very sheltered and not really aligned with, the way I'd been brought up, possibly. And but that first year I met my partner, my wife, and sort of fell in love with her on the spot almost. That sort of distracted me from my, I suppose, self-discovery. But there was one thing I can remember, standing in the Union building at Monash, and down one end there was a door which led to the gay and lesbian common room. I remember standing in front of the door, or just back from it, looking at it and thinking, I affiliate somehow, but I don't know how. But that stage I hadn't had any words of queer or trans, none of that vocabulary had ever been sort of crossed my path.
Just that inner deep thought that
but
you belong somewhere else.
That aligns with who I feel like, but not in the binary of gay or lesbian.
So you've met the person, the love of your life.
Yes.
Basically,
and then real life takes over, distractions,
right.
Hormones and so forth. And this was my first girlfriend, who I've now been with for 39 years. She stood by me through my transition.
What was it like when you first said something to her about this side of your life?
Terrifying. I think tried to broach the subject informally by maybe some, dress up play, which was sort of very adamantly sort of declined. And so I sort of left it there for probably another couple of years, 5 years. But it got to a point where I just needed to vocalise, tell someone who I was. And, you know.
How long into your marriage did that take?
25 years, three children, white picket fence, and very terrifying experience knowing that admitting, or not admitting, I'd already admitted to myself who I was, but sharing that with other people could mean I could lose everything.
Yeah, it is such a scary feeling, and it's that, you know, in conversations I have with people over the last 20 years in my role at Seahorse, is that you're terrified that the ground's going to open up and swallow you up, you know,
Yes.
so dreadfully that you're scared to take that step. And it does take a long time.
Yeah, you need to get into a very, very, not necessarily dark place, but one that sort of, pushes you to make a decision one way or the other. It wasn't planned, the sharing.
Yeah.
It was, we were just sitting watching TV one night, and one of the characters, I think victims, it was a police or crime show, was trans. So I just took that as the universe telling me something. So after the show finished, I turned off the telly, turned to her and said, I have something to tell you. At that stage, all I could vocalise was that I like dressing in women's clothes. But I think once I said it, she almost, and she will account that she's almost immediately taken me then as, yes, you'll be going down the trans journey. Because whether she was able to finally see something in me, I don't know.
That terrifying moment, but you do get to a point where you have to do it. I handled it a lot more problematic than you've described, but it really, you're sort of trying to say, oh, it's only this, but deep down you sort of know that it's going somewhere else, but you don't know how to make it work.
Yeah, no, that's why I think I initially said just cross-dressing, because even at that stage I was probably still worried of the outcome of, you know, at that stage same-sex marriage laws hadn't passed, and you know, I'd sort of done some research into, you know, if I did want to transition, what's involved in changing names and so forth, and that at that stage involved divorce. And you know, that was scary. Even if it was amicable to sort of achieve an outcome, it's still something I didn't want to do.
How long did it take before you then let your kids know?
Well, that was about 10 years ago when I told my wife, and our youngest was just entering high school. So we made the decision, and I totally agree and support it, that to not tell them until they finished high school. It wasn't so much for the children or their social group. It's turned out that that's very accepting. It was more trying to save them from the parents' prejudices. And some of those prejudices have been seen even still after. So it was probably worthwhile that we did adopt the time frame that we did.
Because that's one of the things I sort of thought about myself once I sort of made the decision I'm going to have myself to the kids and then the whole family, as it were. And I sort of talked to particularly people over recent years, is that once you've contacted a group like Seahorse or spoken to other people about it, you've already indicated where it sits in your life.
Oh yes, yeah.
But ultimately, it's about now how you manage it, rather than necessarily jumping out from behind the tree and going, ta-da, guess what? Which usually just doesn't work.
I approached Seahorse at midsummer,
Yeah.
the carnival one year. I think it was about 2017.
Yeah.
I had to drop my son into the city for something for school, and had a few hours to kill. So, again, the universe aligning. I was in the city, carnival was on. So I thought, well, I'll drop around to the
tent.
the tent, and ended up standing there and speaking to, I think, yourself and I forget the other person, but for about 3 hours.
Yeah.
And fully comfortable, admitting who I was, and I think I even adopted my name at that point in time, because I'd already sort of decided on it back then.
Because picking a name is, one of those things. It's it's a privilege to be able to put a name to yourself that you feel reflects yourself. I know when I first thought about it, I could never think of a name, and I sort of had a sense that people use their initials, given initials, seed the idea of a name, because you could get stuff sent in the mail and you could send it to ABC, but I could never think of any name that suited. My first name, given name, starts with D, and I'm going Deirdre, and because Princess Diane was around, and no disrespect to your choosing of the name, but I never saw myself as that. And then I thought I'll use my middle name, and that starts with G, and I Georgina, and all these names, and it just could never find a name that resonated with me. And so I ended up bought a baby name book, and I was sort of going down the lists, and I got to the G's, and there was Greer, Celtic, feminine form of my given middle name.
Ah.
And it just went bingo.
Yep.
Because I come from an Irish, predominantly Irish background with a bit of English, Scottish mixed in, and I thought, well, that's. But as soon as I saw it and said it out loud, it just felt like me.
Yeah, and I adhere to the stereotypes and try to at least maintain my initials. So not that hamstrung me, because I think just Dianne resonates in some way. I don't know exactly how. But
and that's the important thing. It's got to resonate with you. When we used to have what was called Seahorse Saturday at DTs, we had a person come along one day, and we were standing there and said, "Oh, and what's your name?" And they're going, thinking, "Oh, do I give my boy name or give some other name?" No. What do you prefer to call yourself? We spoke to her, and for that night. Anyway, next week came back. I've changed my name because they'd never heard the name said back to them.
Yes.
And realised it doesn't seem to fit me. That was a classic example of people get a name in their head, but because they've never heard it said to them, and it's not me.
I can remember before I actually came out to the kids, we were at one of our children's school events, a play or something like that, and we were just milling around waiting to be seated in the theatre, and I heard someone call out Dianne. And I immediately sort of caught myself having to not turn around and respond.
So you've sort of, in a sense, managed to develop a plan with your partner about where you're going and how you're going to deal with the kids. Comes work. What was the feeling about where you were working?
Again, it all transpired within about the 2 weeks, telling the kids, telling work. I suppose by that stage I had been waiting for about 8 years, 10 years or 8 years. So I was relatively eager to sort of, be out there.
Yeah.
I'd started hormones prior to telling, but not to an extent where there may be evidence, and so come, the last exam is finished. So the children, one night we sit down and I tell them, and my daughter actually gave me this from her jewellery collection, just because it's got a D on it as well. So aligns, and kids were all very accepting, very, very positive. But I was still terrified about work, but it was scheduled to, I'd organise a company to come in and conduct trans awareness training in the workplace. I thought I had an extra week, but I got my calendar dates wrong, so it transpired that it was going to be a week earlier, and by that stage I'd taken over the managing position at the workplace I'm working for, and I'd spoke to the previous manager, GM, who was a little senior to me, but we'd sort of both been there 20 years. And I lost my father quite early, so in some respects I viewed him as maybe a bit of a mentor. So I quizzed him first as to how the owner might feel, and he thought it should be fine. So I send a text saying I need to talk to you, and they come over, he and his wife, who are both co-directors, and I sit them down and very nervously sort of indicate that I'm looking at affirming my gender. I'm transgender, and was that all? I thought it was something to do with the company. So yes, my story from a workplace perspective has been nothing but positive.
Within workplaces, I know where I worked before I retired, there were a couple of people that worked for the business. I knew that would never really say anything, but being in a warehouse environment, a physical type environment, a fluoro shirt and steel cap boots, it sort of doesn't really make much sense. But I was always, and even said it on some of my TV stuff, I was always surprised why no one ever asked me the question, and even one-on-one privately, just I've got long, naturally blonde hair and the glossy nails. And after I left work, I went back for a Christmas function. I'm speaking to the supervisor. He said, "Oh, we've known all along. We've seen you on TV." And I said, "Why?" But what they did was protect me.
That was
they weren't sure how I'd react, but if they'd been watching my TV stuff, they'd know I wasn't that precious about myself. But if any outsiders asked, they shut it down and said, "Don't worry about it." That was really an encouragement, and that was from the managing director all the way down. I can imagine that some business owners and businesses would think, well, it's not so much what's happening within the workforce itself, but how is it reacting to the client?
Yes, how it's going to be perceived. Yeah, and I've had no negativity from any of our customers and suppliers. A lot of these people I've been dealing with for years. So, and over the phone, the voice is still quite deep. Everyone has adopted my name, no problems. There's been no slip-ups even. But I still get called, and I don't mind, mate, and because that's just the way they've been dealing with me.
It's not deliberate.
No, it's just the common
Yeah.
history of how we've been interacting. One interaction which I found very, very positive. I rang up to order some items, and the guy on the other end, just interacted as they have been typically.
Yeah.
Calling me Dianne, but mate and so forth. When I came in to pick up the goods, he came out, apologised for calling me mate,
Yeah.
and asked if there's any other way he could interact with me.
Mm.
And this is probably a 35-year-old guy.
Yeah.
And that was not prompting from me. I didn't sort of call anything out or anything like that. It was just him approaching the subject.
Yeah.
And I think that society is becoming more aware.
And that's what I find too. I've probably ad nauseum to some people, but I talked about, I joined Toastmasters as an exercise initially in being Greer in another public environment, and that I made a very conscious effort not to talk about this side within the structure of the organisation, and I felt that in the end that people ultimately respect me for what I can contribute and the skills that I have on a broader thing, because I sort of got involved outside the club environment to a much broader part of it. I've made it, anywhere I go, I just go as any other individual would go, whether it's shopping at a supermarket or and just have a brief chat with people without even referencing this. If somebody asks me, I'll make that effort to sort of acknowledge it, and if necessary talk about it.
Speaking about comfort of who you are, fortunately, with the support of my wife, she was helping me socially transition for about 3 years before I came out. So we would be going and meeting certain friends and so forth for the 3 years prior. And during those time, I had the feeling I probably needed to be more conscious of how I presented, to be presenting more feminine, to sort of adhere to the stereotype. Now that I've come out and everything's set in stone, name change, everything's official, I have come to the realisation I'm just comfortable with who I am.
Yeah.
If I'm just wearing tracksuit pants, going to the shop Saturday morning, it doesn't matter. I don't feel the need to adhere to a stereotype.
Yeah.
I know I'm me.
Yeah.
This is me. I'm comfortable. Let's take it or leave it.
I think that's the wonderful thing about it. And I think on that really positive note about how your journey and transition has occurred, thank you for joining me in the conversation tonight.
Well, thank you too, Greer.
I'm Greer McGeary. My guest has been Dianne Martin. Thank you for watching Bent TV.